up, everybody? It's Mike B with Bombero Bus VW out at the shop today, and we're going to take Jimi Hendrix on a cruise and check the overall state of things on that car. Spoiler alert, I'm back on the compound, and the reason is this little diagnostic drive taught me something really cool about those particular gauges. But let's still go on this ride, and I'll talk about that in a bit. Maui girl. Good girl. Wants to pull up these hills. So this is one of the things that's been perplexing me with this new setup. You saw that. I just went on a good run, stopped the car. It was idling and running, and this gauge read that there was 0 fuel pressure. But now how can that be? So now I've turned the car off and it's on 0. So what we'll do is watch it for a minute and see if this needle goes up as the pressure should increase. And of course, want to make sure I'm still in the 90-degree club. And if anybody really knows a lot about that, like you could take us into the matrix and elaborate as to, you know, why that occurs, I would love to hear about it in the comments. I mean, I have my suspicions and they make sense, and it's got to be a thing. But all I really care about right now is this fuel pressure after a nice drive like that, because I cannot have these carburetors flooding. So that's what I'm going to keep an eye on for now, and they're very dry at the moment. Okay, after about 5 minutes, the fuel pressure's gone up to 1.5, and still got dry carbs. Okay, I'll leave that alone now. It's been a good 25 minutes. Hasn't climbed over 2, and it's starting to fall back down. Carbs are dry. Okay, so I'm back from that run, and you saw it, you heard it. The car was driving like a dream. It was idling perfect, yet we opened up the deck lid and found 0 on the gauge. Now, how can that be? Something is wrong. So you go through the process in your head. Is the regulator working? Yeah, or else the car wouldn't be running if it was shutting the fuel down to 0. Is the gauge in the right place? Man, I've quadruple checked that. So the other variables were temperature. When the engine was cool, the gauge would show and represent reasonable PSI. After I would drive it, but of course that gauge is warming up there, and then it would not only become inaccurate, it would just read 0. And then as I turned the car off and the temperatures back here cooled, the gauge would start to reflect a number again. So temperature must be having something to do with it. So we're going to conduct an experiment. So right now it's reading 1.5 PSI. Now, let me check the temperature of that gauge. Okay, we're getting a temp of 102 on the gauge. Now I'm gonna hit that gauge with this hair dryer, try to warm it up and see if when it gets warm, it starts to drop the PSI on the gauge.
Yeah, not only is it happening, it's happening pretty quickly. I just turned this hair dryer, and that's a good hair dryer, but I just turned it on.
Okay, so in that short of time, we lost a PSI, and this went from, what was it, 106 to 129. So it appears that as the temperature of that gauge increased, the needle showed less pressure. So what I'll probably do now is take this thing on another drive, park it somewhere, open the deck lid, and I'll expect, if it's at good temperature, that gauge will read 0. And then I'm going to shoot the temperature of the gauge in that moment, so I can get that temperature naturally instead of, you know, artificially increasing it with that hair dryer. Okay, I had to step away so you can hear me, but to me, that's pretty conclusive. How is this car idling that well if it's got 0 fuel pressure, and how did it just drive the way it did? So I'm gonna have to make a decision. It's already made itself, but that gauge is coming out of there, and I don't think I'm gonna use one at all. Hey, but at least I don't have a radiator leak like this one does. And I'm back home, just turned it off. Gauge is on 0, and the temperature is 134. And in reverse, the temp's already coming down as it sits here, and the pressure is already increasing up to 2 PSI on the gauge. So as it cools down, it's starting to show a more accurate reading on the gauge. So there you go. What does this mean for me? It means that I'm gonna take that gauge out. It is a liquid filled one, and guess what? A little bit of research did show that a lot of the world already knows that. You don't use those in these cars or anywhere around the heat because it expands the oil liquid that's inside there and gives you inaccurate readings. I didn't know that, but now I do. And I'm glad I saw it for myself so I could form my own opinion. There are a lot of, you know, gauges don't belong back there opinions, and then some people say, well, I like to have it back there for a diagnostic. I think for me, they shouldn't be ran in the engines in the back of these cars because, you know, my instinct was just that. Getting these hot probably wouldn't be good, so I thought right here would be a cool enough place. But the truth is, in this compartment, there's no cool place. So there you go. It seems that temperature and accuracy have an inverse relationship when it comes to those liquid filled gauges. And, you know, I didn't know that's what this diagnostic drive would teach me today, but that's why we do them. All the time I'm driving, all the time I'm listening and trying to learn more about the health of these engines because, hey, I want to drive this thing for as long as I can. So I hope it helped you. And if it did, don't forget, I'd appreciate a like and or a sub. If it didn't, thanks for hanging out anyway. And I'll see you next time on Bombero Buzz VW.